I was flying high over the Atlantic, finally breathing easy. After months of work, the $1.5 billion Trident deal was sealed. It was the kind of win that changes a company's future. The champagne was waiting, the compliments already flowing. For the first time in a long time, I thought maybe things were turning in my favor. Then my laptop screen lit up. A new email. The subject line made my stomach twist. Termination. Effective immediately. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A prank. But before I could even finish reading, my access was gone. Files, accounts, everything vanished right before my eyes. They had fired me mid-flight, right after I secured the biggest deal of their lives. That's how my story of betrayal began. And it's not just about what they did to me. It's about what I did next. The quiet revenge they never saw coming. Stay with me, because this is not just a story about loss. It's a story about taking back power in the most unexpected way. And if you find yourself caught up in it, don't forget to support the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this with the people you care about. I stared at the screen, frozen. The passengers around me were laughing, drinking, watching movies. Nobody knew my entire world had just been pulled out from under me at 35,000 feet. I had just made the deal of a lifetime, and instead of a thank you, I got a knife in the back. My mind kept replaying the moment in the boardroom weeks earlier when Caleb Vance, the CEO, had slapped me on the back after I saved a deal that was collapsing. "That's leadership," he said. I believed him. I thought maybe finally the years of loyalty, the endless hours, the missed birthdays and holidays, all of it would mean something. Maybe I'd move up. Maybe I'd finally get the title and recognition I had earned. I was wrong. The truth had slipped out weeks before this flight. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. 2 board members were talking in the next room. "Evelyn's brilliant," one said, "but she makes the VPs look bad." The other laughed. "She's field ops. Not EVP material. Field ops." That was how they saw me. Not a leader. Not a visionary. Just someone to do the dirty work and make them look good. And I was good at it. Too good. That was the problem. It wasn't the first time I had taken the fall for them, either. A year earlier, Caleb's daughter Sierra had made a mistake that could have ruined everything. She caused a data leak, client information, private details, the kind of scandal that could destroy trust overnight. Caleb had called me in the middle of the night. "Clean it up." She didn't know any better. And I did. 72 hours without sleep, spinning a disaster into a hiccup, protecting not just the company but his daughter. No one ever knew it was her. I carried that secret like a stone in my chest, and I never once asked for thanks. That was my mistake. So when I found my pitch deck, the one I spent months building, the one that landed Trident, listed under Sierra's name, I wasn't even shocked. She had changed a font, moved a line, and suddenly she was the author. She was the rising star. I was invisible. On the plane, staring at that termination email, something inside me shifted. The betrayal didn't spark anger. It didn't even spark tears. It was quieter than that, like ice settling deep in my chest. I knew in that moment they hadn't destroyed me. They had set me free. Because what they didn't know was that 6 months earlier, I had started building something of my own. A small team. Quiet meetings. A vision for a company that could outthink, outwork, and outmaneuver Ethereum. We called it Project Aegis. It wasn't meant as revenge. It was meant as survival. But now? Now it could be both. The first months after the Trident whispers were filled with silence. No calls from Caleb, no invitation to the executive floor, no mention of a promotion. I told myself they were waiting for the right moment, that the board needed time to formalize things. I kept showing up early, staying late, handing in work polished enough to blind them if they looked too closely. And still nothing. Then one night, working late at headquarters, I found the truth. The conference room down the hall was lit, though most of the floor had emptied. I heard voices through the cracked door, the kind of low murmurs men use when they think they're safe. At first I ignored it, until I caught my name. "Evelyn's brilliant," one of them said. I froze mid-step. "But she makes the VPs look bad. Every time she walks into a room, they lose face." A laugh followed. Smooth, dismissive. "She's field ops. Not EVP material. You don't promote someone like that. You use them." The word field ops cut deeper than anything else. That's what they saw when they looked at me. A soldier. Someone who handled the dirty jobs, the crises, the fires no one else wanted to touch. I wasn't being tested for leadership. I wasn't being groomed for anything. I was being contained. I pressed my back to the wall, heart thudding in my chest. For years I had convinced myself I was climbing. That each sacrifice, every holiday I worked through, every vacation I canceled, every night I spent in airports instead of at home, was an investment in a future that was coming. But standing in that hallway, listening to them, I realized I had been running in place. The worst part wasn't their words. It was the casualness of them. They weren't debating my future, or even weighing my worth. They had already decided. I was useful, not valuable. Replaceable the second my usefulness ran dry. I stayed there long enough to hear chairs scrape, footsteps fade. I slipped out before they saw me, though part of me wanted to kick that door wide open and demand they say it to my face. But I didn't. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and stared at the glowing screen, my reflection ghosting in the glass. For the first time, I felt the walls around me closing in. Every email I sent, every report I submitted, every meeting I walked into, it all felt like shackles. They didn't want me to lead. They wanted me to keep carrying the weight so they could pretend to stand taller. That night, the office was silent when I finally left. The elevator mirrors showed a woman who looked calm, composed, professional. Inside, though, I knew something had cracked. Not in anger, not in panic. Something deeper. A clear understanding. I wasn't their rising star. I was their shield. And shields don't get promoted. They get used until they break. It was close to midnight when my phone rang, Caleb's name flashing across the screen. He never called me directly unless the problem was too big for anyone else. His voice was tight, almost panicked. "Evelyn, I need you. Sierra made a mistake. A bad one. You have to fix it." I didn't ask questions, just told him I was on my way. By the time I reached the office, the damage was clear. Sensitive client files, private communications, account details, things that should never see daylight, had slipped out because Sierra clicked the wrong link and forwarded a file to the wrong chain. In any other company, it would have meant lawsuits, scandal, maybe even collapse. For Ethereum, it could have been the end. Sierra was sitting at the long glass table, her face pale, mascara smudged from crying. She tried to explain through shaky breaths. It was just one attachment. I didn't know. I thought it was internal. Caleb stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, looking at me like I was a surgeon about to attempt a miracle. "Make it go away," he said quietly. "Not a request. An order." I went to work. Calls to security firms, messages to sympathetic journalists, pulling every favor I had with contacts in the press. I spent 3 days without real sleep, piecing together a story that turned Sierra's disaster into a blip. "A minor breach, swiftly contained," the headlines read. Ethereum's clients stayed calm. Investors breathed again. By the end, the crisis was buried. Sierra's name never appeared in a single article. Caleb made sure of that. When the press called, I was the one who answered, speaking carefully, turning every question into reassurance. Sierra didn't even have to lift a finger. When it was over, Caleb came to my office. He looked tired but relieved. "You saved us," he said. "Us. Not her. Not me. Us." His daughter was safe. The company was safe. And I had done exactly what he asked. Sierra avoided me for weeks after. When I did see her, she couldn't look me in the eye. Guilt, maybe, or maybe just embarrassment that I knew the truth she was desperate to hide. But Caleb? He treated it as if nothing had happened. No bonus, no thank you, not even acknowledgement in front of the board. Just silence. That was the first time I understood how deep my loyalty ran, and how much they relied on it. They knew I wouldn't complain, wouldn't expose Sierra, wouldn't burn the house down even though I held the match in my hand. They counted on my silence, and I gave it to them. But late at night, when the office lights were off and the city hummed outside the windows, I replayed those 72 hours. The calls. The lies. The way my body shook from exhaustion while Sierra slept comfortably at home. It wasn't anger that stayed with me. It was the realization that my loyalty wasn't a strength in their eyes. It was a leash. 3 days before the Trident trip, I opened the shared drive to polish the pitch deck one last time. I knew every slide by heart, every number, every phrase carefully shaped to land with the clients. That deck was my masterpiece, the kind of work careers are built on. But when I checked the file details, my stomach tightened. The author's name wasn't mine. It was Sierra's. For a moment I thought it was a glitch, some technical mix-up. I opened it, scrolling through slide after slide. The content was unchanged. My models. My research. My phrasing. The only difference was cosmetic. A few fonts swapped. A header nudged half an inch. Tiny adjustments, meaningless except for one thing. They gave her just enough cover to slap her name on my work. I stared at the screen, heat rising in my chest. It wasn't just theft. It was erasure. She had taken my months of labor and claimed it as hers, and the system around her would reward it. Caleb would beam proudly. The board would nod at his daughter's brilliance. And me? I would stand in the corner, invisible, applauding like a loyal soldier. I should have confronted her. I should have stormed into Caleb's office and demanded he look me in the eye. Instead, I closed the file slowly, my hand steady even though I felt anything but calm. Because I knew how the story would play out. If I accused her, they'd call it petty. If I pushed, they'd call it unprofessional. I would be painted as jealous, unstable, unfit for the role I had already been denied. So I said nothing. But silence doesn't mean acceptance. In that moment, something in me hardened. The anger didn't flare. It sank slow and cold, like a stone dropping into deep water. I knew the theft wasn't just about one deck. It was about rewriting history before my eyes. If Sierra was listed as the architect of Trident, then the deal, the glory, the future, all of it would be hers. My name would vanish. At the celebration dinner a day later, I watched her bask in it. The board members congratulated her. Caleb toasted her. A rising leader, he called her. She blushed, smiled, played humble, but her eyes flicked to me across the table. A look I knew too well. A look that said she thought she had won. I raised my glass and smiled back, but inside I was memorizing every word, every glance, every laugh. Because while they thought they were erasing me, they were giving me clarity. They believed they had buried me in silence. What they didn't realize was that silence was my weapon. And when the moment came, I would use it. That night, lying awake, I repeated one truth to myself over and over. They had stolen my name, but not my future. And soon, they would learn the cost of underestimating me. I didn't build Project Aegis out of anger. Not at first. I built it out of survival. 6 months before the Trident deal, I started noticing the patterns. The board praised me in private, but dismissed me in public. Caleb leaned on me in every crisis, but pushed someone else forward when the credit was handed out. Every win I delivered seemed to become a stepping stone for someone else, never for me. So I began quietly preparing. At first, it was nothing more than coffee with an old colleague, a phone call with someone I trusted who had been pushed out of Ethereum. Then it became dinners, late-night brainstorming sessions, ideas scribbled on napkins. Slowly, a group formed, people like me. Brilliant minds the company had discarded because they didn't fit Caleb's mold. Analysts too sharp. Strategists too outspoken. Managers too ethical to play the games. We called it Project Aegis. A shield. Not just for us, but for something bigger. A place where work would mean something again, where people wouldn't be erased to make space for someone's daughter or nephew or golf buddy. The first weeks were fragile. Secret meetings, borrowed office space, whispers over encrypted calls. We weren't ready for the world to know us yet. But the more we talked, the more certain I became. This wasn't just a dream. It was a lifeline. I poured myself into it at night, after long days at Ethereum. I would sit at my kitchen table with files spread around me, running models, sketching strategies, mapping the market. There were nights my eyes burned from exhaustion, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was insurance. A parachute, in case the day came when Caleb decided I was no longer useful. I thought maybe that day was years away. I thought I had time. But when Sierra stole my deck and Caleb handed her the spotlight, I understood something I hadn't before. The day had already come. They were already pushing me out, piece by piece, removing my name, rewriting the story, replacing me with someone who had my blood, sweat, and genius stitched into her clothes like embroidery. And that meant Project Aegis wasn't just a backup plan anymore. It was my only plan. I still showed up at Ethereum every morning. I still played the loyal soldier. But behind the polite smiles and carefully chosen words, I was moving pieces they couldn't see. Every call I took with a client, every side comment they made, I tucked away for later. Every person who hinted at their distrust of Caleb or their frustration with Sierra, I remembered. I was already building bridges they didn't know existed. They thought I was trapped. But the truth was, I was already standing on a runway of my own design, a parachute strapped to my back. And the higher they tried to fly without me, the harder they would fall when I finally pulled the cord. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. That's what Caleb called it when the invitation arrived. A quiet gathering with the board, a toast to the Trident deal, a chance to recognize the team. I almost laughed when I read it. Recognize the team. I knew what those words meant. Recognition never had my name on it. The restaurant was one of those Manhattan places where the walls seemed to hum with money. Soft jazz in the background, wine poured before you asked, waiters who vanished the moment you looked their way. I walked in, nodded politely, and took my seat at the long table. Caleb was at the head, smiling like a king hosting a feast. Sierra sat to his right, dressed sharp, glowing as though the night were already hers. The board members buzzed with compliments, most of them directed at her. "Brilliant work on Trident, Sierra," one of them said, clinking his glass. She smiled modestly, lowering her eyes just enough to seem humble, though her lips couldn't quite hide the satisfaction. My deck, my models, my words, now her crown. I sipped my wine and kept my face neutral. Let them celebrate. Let them dig their own grave with every false compliment. Halfway through the meal, Caleb stood, lifting his glass. "Ethereum is entering a new era," he began, his voice steady, rehearsed. "And leadership is the key to that future. Which is why I'm proud to announce a new step for Sierra." He paused, letting the table lean in. "She will be shadowing Evelyn on the Trident trip. To learn. To grow. To prepare for the role she will one day inherit." The room erupted in applause. Sierra's cheeks flushed pink, though her eyes flicked to me with a flash of triumph. She wasn't just stealing credit anymore. She was being groomed to replace me outright. I raised my glass and clinked it lightly against the one beside me. My smile was practiced, polite, but inside I felt the quiet click of something locking into place. This wasn't humiliation. This was confirmation. Caleb had set his plan in motion, and he believed I would play along, train his daughter, hand her the keys, and step aside when the time came. I said nothing. I didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Silence was my armor now. After dinner, Sierra caught me at the door. "I hope we'll make a great team," she said, her tone sweet but edged with something sharper. I looked at her carefully, then nodded. "Of course. I'll teach you everything I know." And that was the truth. I would teach her everything. Not the way Caleb intended, but in the way that would ensure she walked straight into the storm she thought she was clever enough to command. They thought the setup was theirs. What they didn't see was that the game had already shifted. And I was no longer playing to win their approval. I was playing to end them. Tokyo came first. The Trident executives were cautious, polite to Sierra, but never warm. I watched her stumble over numbers she barely understood, trying to disguise her uncertainty with confidence. She had memorized lines from my deck, but when the questions went off script, her mask slipped. I stepped in smoothly, translating confusion into clarity, turning hesitation into trust. By the end of the meeting, the client's attention was back on me. Sierra smiled through clenched teeth, whispering later, "You could have let me handle that." I just nodded, as though I hadn't noticed the relief in her eyes when I rescued her. London was next. A boardroom high above the Thames, rain streaking down glass windows. The executives grilled us harder this time. Sierra's answers were rehearsed, stiff, too polished to feel real. I cut through it with stories, examples, small truths that made the numbers breathe. Linda Chun, the London lead, leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. When the meeting ended, she shook my hand and said, "It feels like we're doing business with you, not your company." I let the words hang, offering only a polite smile. But I stored them away. Seeds. Sao Paulo was the final stop. Hot, restless, alive with energy. The meeting stretched for hours, negotiations twisting and tightening until Sierra nearly cracked under the pressure. I carried us across the finish line, not with flashy slides or memorized phrases, but with the kind of instinct that only comes from years of living in the trenches. When it was done, Luis Mata, the Brazilian CEO, lingered after the others left. He didn't look at Sierra. He looked straight at me. "You are the reason this deal exists," he said, his voice low but certain. "Not your company. You. If you ever decide to lead instead of follow, call me." The words sank deep, steady and unshakable. I didn't answer, just shook his hand. But inside, I felt the shift. Another seed planted, one that would bloom when the time was right. On the flight home, Sierra slept beside me, head tilted against the window, blissfully unaware of how close she had come to losing the deal entirely. Caleb's daughter, wrapped in the illusion of her own brilliance, convinced she was ready to lead. I stared out at the clouds and thought of the faces in Tokyo, London, Sao Paulo. They hadn't trusted Ethereum. They had trusted me. That distinction mattered more than any title Caleb could deny me. By the time we landed, the path was clear. They believed they had used me to secure their future. But what they didn't know was that I had used them too. Every meeting, every conversation, every handshake had been groundwork for something greater. Trident wasn't just their win. It was my foundation. And soon, those seeds I had planted would grow into something no one at that dinner table could erase. Back in New York, the celebration was short-lived. Caleb called a company-wide meeting, parading Sierra on stage as the face of Trident. "This deal," he said proudly, "is proof of the leadership our future deserves." She stood beside him, smiling for the cameras, while I sat in the front row and applauded with everyone else. Not a single mention of my name. Not one. By the next morning, my office was gone. My badge still worked, but my desk had been cleared, my files archived, my team reassigned. No explanation, no conversation. Just absence, like I had been erased overnight. That evening, in the quiet of my apartment, I opened my secure laptop. 3 emails. Short, simple, deliberate. Each one sent to the people who mattered most. Yuki in Tokyo, Linda in London, Luis in Sao Paulo. The subject line was the same. The door is open. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. They already knew the truth. That Ethereum's victory wasn't built on its CEO, or its board, or Caleb's daughter with her borrowed brilliance. It had been built on me. And trust, once broken, doesn't heal. Then I closed the laptop and waited. The silence that followed was beautiful. Days passed. At first, Caleb's tone was casual, cheerful even. "A call here, a message there. Haven't heard from Luis. You talked to him? Yuki hasn't signed the follow-up yet, did you notice?" Sierra chimed in with forced optimism. "Maybe they're just busy." But the silence stretched, and their cheer faded. Calls turned frantic. Emails piled up, urgent, desperate. The Trident partners weren't responding. Not to Caleb. Not to Sierra. Not to anyone at Ethereum. It was as if the $1.5 billion deal had dissolved into the air, ghosted by the very people they thought they controlled. I watched it unfold from a distance, each unanswered message a quiet strike, each ignored call a blade slipping between their ribs. There were no lawsuits, no messy scandals splashed across headlines. Just silence. The kind that eats through a company from the inside, leaving panic and doubt in its wake. Sierra tried to reach me directly once. A late-night message. "Did you say something to them? Please, Evelyn. Tell me what's happening." I didn't reply. Caleb never asked me outright. He didn't need to. He had been in the game long enough to know the rules. Relationships are fragile, trust even more so. Once you lose it, you can't buy it back. And his empire was built on borrowed loyalty, loyalty that had never truly belonged to him. So I let the silence do my work for me. No threats, no confrontations, no proof he could hold up in a courtroom. Just the absence of me. And in that absence, everything he thought was unshakable began to crumble. The announcement went out quietly. No fanfare, no press conference, no cameras waiting on Wall Street. Just a press release, short and sharp, sent to every major outlet. Project Aegis secures $1.5 billion partnership with global leaders. My name was at the top. Not buried in the fine print, not erased in a footnote. Right there, front and center. Evelyn Reed, CEO. Within an hour, my phone buzzed nonstop. Former colleagues, industry contacts, even competitors who once brushed me aside. They all wanted to talk. Congratulations, offers, invitations. The silence I had let linger around Caleb now roared with my name. I sat in the new headquarters, a modest space high above the city, surrounded by the people I trusted. The same people Ethereum had tossed aside. They weren't bitter. They were sharp, hungry, alive in a way you can't fake. Together, we had built something real. And now, with Trident by our side, we weren't just surviving. We were undeniable. Across town, the fallout was immediate. Caleb called an emergency board meeting, but the numbers told the story for him. Clients were leaving, revenue slipping, confidence gone. He tried to spin it, to paint me as a thief, a traitor. But the board didn't care about loyalty. They cared about survival. And Caleb had lost the one thing they couldn't replace, trust. By the end of the week, the whispers spread. Caleb was out, voted down by his own people. Sierra didn't last much longer. Without me propping her up, she crumbled under the weight of expectations she was never prepared to meet. Her resignation hit the news one quiet Friday evening, the kind of detail most people skimmed past. forgotten almost as quickly as she had been elevated. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in my beginning. One evening, long after the press frenzy had cooled, I walked the halls of our office. The Aegis logo glowed on the wall, clean and sharp. My name was etched beneath it, not because I demanded it, but because my team insisted. For once, the recognition was real. I stood there for a long time, remembering the hallway where I had overheard the board dismiss me as field ops. The nights I had buried Sierra's mistakes. The dinner where Caleb announced she would shadow me. The deck with her name instead of mine. Every slight, every theft, every silence, they had all led here. They thought they had buried me in the dark. But they hadn't buried me. They had planted me. And now, standing in the glow of something built with my own hands, surrounded by people who saw me for exactly who I was, I realized the truth. I wasn't the shield anymore. I was the blade. And Aegis wasn't just a company. It was the reckoning. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away in silence and building Aegis? Or should I have stayed and fought to change Ethereum from the inside? I really want to know what you think, so share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed my story and want more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next.